Hello YouTube, this video will be a continuation of the previous video I posted talking about the various Spider-Man films and how I rank them. Just in case you don't remember, I'm ranking the three MCU Spider-Man films, Spider-Man Homecoming, Far From Home, and No Way Home, along with the three Sam Raimi directed Spider-Man films, Spider-Man, Spider-Man 2, and Spider-Man 3, along with Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, and then The Amazing Spider-Man and Amazing Spider-Man 2, directed by Mark Webb. So I'm including those 9 Spider-Man films in this ranking. Now, continuing on from where I left off, at number 6, we have Spider-Man 2002, directed by Sam Raimi. Now, I know that for some of you, this placement will upset you, and I totally get that. If you're someone that has fond memories of seeing this movie in the theaters when it came out. I agree that this is an important film for the comic book genre because back in 2002 the genre was not in the same place that it is now. Nowadays there were a ton of comic book movies coming out, but back in the early 2000s, that was not the case. When Batman and Robin came out before 2000, that was a big blow to the comic book movie genre because that movie was a complete failure, and therefore for quite a good amount of time there were virtually no comic book movies coming out at all. But then you had Blade and the first X-Men film that came out in 2000 or 2001. I don't remember exactly. But those films started to bring the comic book genre back. However, neither of them were really big blockbusters. Spider-Man 2002 was the first mega blockbuster comic book film of this new millennium from 2000 onwards. Let's see, the first X-Men film came out in, let's see, I'm looking this up. Okay, it came out in 2000, and then Blade came out in, let's see here. I'm looking it up right now, but it came out at about the same time. Okay, Blade came out just a little bit earlier in 1998. Let's see, I think Batman and Robin came out in 1990. Let's see, 1997. So yeah, after that film came out for about a year, there were virtually no comic book movies coming out at all. But then Blade came out and it did well, both at the box office and critically speaking. And then the first X-Men film came out and it also did well. However, the big difference between the first X-Men film and Spider-Man 2002 is that the first X-Men film has a more serious tone and it does not actually embrace the absurdity that naturally comes with these comic book characters. Pretty much all of the X-Men in that film are wearing black leather, not the more colorful comic book costumes. By contrast, in the first Spider-Man film, Spider-Man is wearing a colorful comic book costume, and the movie has a more lighthearted tone as well. So that was something that was quite a big deal at the time, embracing the absurdity of the comic books. So comic book films nowadays definitely owe a debt to this first Spider-Man film. Also, the main theme done by Danny Elfman is fantastic. It's one of the most iconic pieces of comic book film score that's ever been composed. This score, along with the John Williams Superman theme from the Christopher Reeve Superman films, the Danny Elfman Batman theme from Batman 1989, along with the Avengers theme done by Alan Silvestri, are all iconic pieces of comic book film score. Tobey Maguire gives a great performance as Peter Parker. De- Willem Dafoe gives a great performance as Norman Osborn. He absolutely goes for it and hams it up as the Green Goblin, which absolutely works for the tone that this film has. The scenes where Spider Man is swinging around are done well. This film does a great job of doing the Spider Man origin story. And what I think really separates this film from the Amazing Spider-Man, the Amazing Spider-Man films, along with the MCU Spider-Man films, is that this film does the traditional Spider-Man origin story. It's by far the most direct translation of Spider-Man's comic book origins. In the Amazing Spider-Man films, you have the angle of Peter's parents, the mystery there. And then when it comes to the free MCU Spider-Man films, they tell the Spider-Man origin story in a subversive way. By contrast, this film does the traditional Spider-Man origin story, and it absolutely does it well. This film is also quite fun and entertaining to watch. The relationship between Peter and Harry is something that this trilogy consistently does well. But I will say that if you haven't watched this film in a while and you've seen a lot of modern day comic book films, what I mean really is comic books that came out like in the last 10 years, and then you go back and watch this film, you can definitely tell that it came out at a different time. Also, I will say that Mary Jane is not a very interesting character in this film because really she's just a pretty face. She is just a damsel in distress who constantly needs to be saved. I mean, let's go over quickly how many times MJ is saved in this film. Peter saves her at the lunchroom when she slips, and then when Green Goblin attacks that fair and she falls, Spider Man saves her, and then later on, when Mary Jane is being attacked by thugs in an alley, Spider Man saves her, and then during the third act, Mary Jane is dropped by the Green Goblin from a large height, and then Spider Man saves her. That's 4 times in this one film alone. And some of the dialogue is not that good. This film definitely can be rather cheesy at times, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing, because I mean, the movie is intentionally more goofy. But for example, there's that line where Peter says, I hunch. I think that's in this film. But one that really stands out to me is this exchange between the Green Goblin and Spider Man. Green Goblin says, What about my generous proposal? Are you in or are you out? Spider Man says, It's you who's out, Gobby. Out of your mind. To me, that literally comes off like a line from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. and uh, and then also during the third act, you literally have the Green Goblin saying the singing, doing his own version of this. I'm trying to remember what the name of the song is. I don't remember, but Green Goblin's on his glider, and he sings, "The itsy bitsy spider went up the water spout. Down came the goblin and took the spider out." But I do want to clearly say this. The fact that this film is being placed at number 6 on my list and not higher has more to do with the fact that I just enjoy the movies that are higher up than this film more than Spider-Man 2002. This placement has less to do with me having a lot of problems with this film. No, I like this film. It's just I like other Spider-Man films more than this one. So, moving on now to number 5, we have Spider-Man Homecoming. I think this is a very fun and entertaining film. I just think that the films that are higher up than this one have more substance to them. There's more things that I like about those films. I find it quite refreshing that this film is a small scale, low stakes, more lightweight film, similar to Ant Man and Ant Man and the Wasp, which are also intentionally more fun, entertaining, lightweight films that are not particularly ambitious. In this film, you don't have a villain that's trying to take over the world or anything big like that. The film has more of a light-hearted tone. Tom Holland gives a great performance as Peter Parker and Spider-Man. That's something I find consistent throughout all of Spider-Man's appearances in the MCU, not even just in the free MCU Spider-Man films, but also in Infinity War, Endgame, all the films that he appears in. Also, I find this film very funny and rewatchable as well. And then when it comes to the villain, I think that Adrian Toomes, or the Vulture, is a great villain. One of the big reasons for that is because you understand where he's coming from. In the opening scene, we learn that Adrian Toomes was in charge of this construction crew that were brought in to clean up the mess left over from the Battle of New York. First of all, I think this is a great way to add more to the Avengers. It's a very good idea to establish that there was a mess left behind from the battle that needed to be cleaned up. Makes perfect sense if you think about it. And I like that we see actually the aftermath of that scene from the end of the Avengers where Thor and Hulk crash this Chitauri Leviathan into this building. We see that same building in the beginning of Spider-Man Homecoming. So Adrian Toomes and his crew are doing the work they've been assigned, but then this government lady comes in, basically says, as per a new order that's been given, we are going to take over this construction operation. You can all leave. Then Adrian Toomes says, wait a minute, we all need this money because we have families that we're trying to provide for. I could lose my house. This lady's response is not one that shows any kind of sympathy at all. She just says, oh, sorry, sir, there's nothing more I can do. So you can understand that Toomes felt like he was treated unfairly, that he was cheated out of this job that he had. So you can understand why he would be angry at the government. And then after that, Toomes and his crew learn via the news that Tony Stark is taking over the cleanup effort. So what they see is this rich billion, this rich guy, one of the Avengers, is coming in to clean up the mess that the Avengers played a part in creating, thus leading to us being cheated out of this job and just completely dismissed. So at that point, Toomes and his crew decide to not give back to the government all this Chitauri tech they have that was left behind from the battle. They instead reverse engineer it to create weapons and then sell that on the black market. So, what's really effective about the Vulture in this film. So on the one hand, you don't condone his actions. He definitely does villainous deeds, but you also do understand where he's coming from and can feel a certain amount of sympathy for him. Also, I really like the twist in the third act where we learn that Adrian Toomes is the father to Liz Allen, who Peter is taking out to prom. That moment where Peter knocks on the door, then Toomes answers the door. Oh, it's done so well. There's so much tension for that whole scene, even though Toombs isn't doing anything outwardly villainous because his family is there, so that makes sense. But there's still so much tension in the air. And then when Toombs drives Peter and Liz to the dance, that is so well done. Where Toombs is slowly piecing together the truth that Peter is Spider Man. Toombs comes off as very intimidating once again, even though while Toombs is in the car, he's not doing anything outwardly villainous. It's not like he's laughing maniacally or anything like that. In that moment, he's acting like a normal guy, but he still comes off as really intimidating. And I like that moment where Toombs stops the car because there's a red light, but then the light turns green, so he goes ahead. At first, the light on his face is red, and then it turns green. That's a really good visual way of communicating to the audience that Toombs now knows the truth. And then when Toombs pulls a gun on Peter, I like that he is genuinely grateful to Peter for saving Liz's life. And then during the final battle, I think what hits really hard is that Peter actually tries to save Toombs's life. And then during the post-credit scene, we see that Toombs does return the favor because when he has an opportunity to rat out Peter as Spider-Man to this fellow inmate, he decides not to do that. So I think the Vulture is one of the better MCU villains because he's not one of these generic evil for the sake of being evil, mustache twirling villains that are just very forgettable. And then I also think that all the other performances are good as well. I will say though I don't like about this film is Tony's behavior. What I mean by that is it's already bad enough in Civil War that Tony basically kidnaps a minor because he takes Peter along to this battle despite the fact that Peter could have easily been seriously injured or even killed because Peter is not an adult. He's a young, naive, and inexperienced superhero, whereas all the other superheroes that participated in the airport battle in Civil War are adults who are a lot more experienced, that have had a lot more training than Peter has. And what's worse is Tony doesn't even tell Aunt May, and once again, Peter is a minor, so that was already highly, highly questionable. Then it gets worse in this film. If you think about it, the fact that Tony gives this powerful suit of armor to a teenager and then not only doesn't stay in touch with Peter or call him back or answer his calls at all, but he just leaves this to Happy Hogan, who doesn't take Peter seriously at all and doesn't communicate with him at all. Yeah, you can understand why Happy would be annoyed that Peter's constantly calling and texting him. That's reasonable. But the fact that Tony gives this super powerful suit of armor that even has an insta kill mode to a high school teenager and then gives him no kind of support at all. He just drops him off and says, oh, if there's another mission, he'll call you. But then he never does. It's not it's not good at all. Admittedly, it is good that after what happens with the fairy, Tony does take the suit away. Yeah, and he says that I'm trying to be better than my dad was. I'm trying to break the cycle. And then in the end, he does accept Peter's decision not to take this more powerful Spider Man suit that Tony offers him. That's good, but still, what Tony does in this film is not good. And as I talked about before, it definitely gets worse. But moving on now to number 4. Let's see. We have Spider-Man No Way Home, Spider-Man 2, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, and I think that's it. I think that's it. Yes, let's see. Ninth place, we had Amazing Spider-Man 2. Eighth place, Spider-Man Free. Third, third place, the seventh place, I mean, The Amazing Spider-Man. Sixth place, Spider-Man 2002. Fifth, oh wait, Spider-Man Far From Home. Yeah, that's right. So, Amazing Spider-Man 2, last place. Eighth place, Spider-Man Free. Seventh place, The Amazing Spider-Man. Sixth place, Spider-Man Far From Home. Yeah, that's right. And then fifth place, Spider-Man 2002. Fourth place, Spider-Man Homecoming. All right, so coming in at number 3, we have Spider-Man. Spider-Man No Way Home. So, in a way, this film is frustrating for me because, on the one hand, it is such a gift to Spider Man fans. The fact that we actually got to see the 3 different live action versions of Spider Man, Tom Holland's version, Andrew Garfield's version, and Tobey Maguire's version, come together, that's incredible. It's so awesome that we actually got that. And I'm both very impressed and surprised that the marketing for this film did not give that away. Yeah, there was a ton of speculation online, but still, the fact that the people that made this film chose not to include the other 2 versions of Spider-Man in any of the trailers or any of the TV spots, and they never once confirmed or denied that they would be in this film. I find that very impressive that they decided we're not going to give away the biggest thing that this movie has to offer. Also, the way this film ends is very effective. The fact that this film makes it clear that this trilogy does tell Spider Man's origin story, but in a subversive way, is great. The performances are good across the board. The fight between Doctor Strange and Spider Man in the mirror dimension is fantastic. Like some of the scenes we saw in Doctor Strange, it's a mind bending, visually trippy scene that is just so creative. Also, I like that you have Ned discovering that he has powers in this film. But, however, the setup for this film, man, it is really, really lazy. So, Peter goes to Doctor Strange in to get help because his life has been turned upside down, hurt by the fact that Mysterio ratted him out as Spider-Man in front of the whole world. And he also wants to get into college. He wants him along with MJ and Ned to get into college. But as Doctor Strange points out, Spider-Man didn't even think once to contact the college. But that's not the worst part. However, the worst part of this is that Doctor Strange, for some reason, is indulging the whims of an immature high school teenager. He's an adult who is very smart, is the sorcerer supreme at this point, and has had a lot knows a lot about the mystical arts. Yet, despite all of that, he indulges the whims of an immature high school teenager, and he could not be bothered to properly tell Peter about what exactly this spell entailed before he actually started casting it. It is just so lazy that everything that happens in this film happens because Doctor Strange and Peter were so stupid that they could not be bothered for even like 30 seconds to discuss the parameters of this incredibly dangerous spell, even though Doctor Strange was clearly warned by Juan, who is also an experienced sorcerer, that this spell is dangerous. It traverses the borders between known and unknown reality. And yet, for some reason, Doc, for some reason, Stephen decides to just go ahead with the spell, not discuss the parameters at all, not inform Peter about what this spell entailed before he started casting it. This leads to of a lot of bad things happening, and it all could have been avoided with even the smallest amount of common sense. Then when it comes to the ending, it is very powerful to see that Peter makes the ultimate sacrifice at the end of this film. I'm not saying that he lays down his life, because he doesn't, or that he decides to go through an excruciating amount of pain, physically speaking, but he agrees to this spell that makes everyone forget about who he is, which makes it so that he has no identity really at all. And no one knows who he is. Though I will say there's definitely questions that the ending of this film leaves you with. One that I think jumps out immediately is this. Okay, no one remembers who Peter is, but are there still any digital records that prove Peter Parker exist? Earlier on in this film, Peter actually records himself talking, and this is actually on the news. So what happens to that after the spell is cast? I mean, does the spell just erase that video? What about other either videos or or comments online that mention or talk about Peter Parker? What happens to all that? I mean, what happens to like comments on social media or YouTube talking about Peter? Also, for that matter, Flash, as we learn in this film, has written. Well, Flash has written a book about Spider-Man. We don't know whether it talks about Peter or not, but still, there would have been a lot of stuff that would have proven Peter existed. So, what happens to all that after the spell is cast? Also, after the spell is cast, does Peter still have any forms of identification at all? I mean, I'm wondering, does he still have a birth certificate? Does he still have either a permit or a driver's license? The real question that this brings these questions actually bring up here is, does the government, for example, have any record of Peter Parker? Does the hospital that Peter was born in have any record of Peter being born? Now, I will say There's a detail here about the ending that definitely gives a clue. So, Peter, at the end of the film, rents an apartment. Why is that important? Well, because in order for one to be able to rent an apartment, they have to be able to show ID. So, Peter would have had to have been able to prove that he has a bank account. So this means a bank still has records of Peter Parker. And also, Peter would have had to have shown his social security card in order to be able to rent out an apartment. So that tells us that there is some record of Peter out there, but it's just unclear how far that goes. But moving on now to number two. Yeah, I just have Spider Man 2 and Spider Man Across the Spider Verse. Number two, Spider Man 2. I think this is a great film. It does a great job of exploring Peter's character. Doc Ock is a great villain. It's really powerful that in the end, Doc Ock is actually redeemed, that Otto actually comes back at the end of this film, does the right thing, and then pays for that with his life. Also, the action scenes in this film are great. There's not a huge amount of action in this film, but the action that is there is fantastic. The visuals and music are great as well. But I will say the drama between Peter and MJ, at a certain point it does get a bit frustrating. Also, the astronaut character in this film was the son of J. Jonah Jameson. The head of the Daily Bugle was Peter's boss. He's the one who is set to marry MJ in this film, but then MJ leaves him at the altar. Which, by the way, that's not a nice thing to do at all. But the real problem here is that J. Jonah Jameson's son in this film is such a bland and forgettable character. You barely remember anything about him at all. I mean, other than the fact that he's an astronaut, is the son of J. Jonah Jameson, and is set to marry MJ, there's nothing to his character beyond that at all. So he's not memorable, a very boring and forgettable character. But I still think this is a great film. However, coming in at number one, we have Spider Man Into the Spider Verse. The reason why I have this film at number one is because, first of all, the animation style is not only very well done, but very creative as well. It makes this film literally look like a comic book. One of the biggest reasons why that's the case is that in this film, you have thought bubbles that you also have in comics that are used to show what a character is thinking. Also, I love how creative this film gets. You have Peter A. Parker than Peter B. Parker, so two different versions of Peter, Miles Morales, and then several different Spider people. You have Spider Woman or Gwen Stacy, and then Spider Ham, who is literally a pig. And you have Penny Parker, who has this robot. There's this anime like visual style that is associated with her. And then you also have this black and white 1920s version of Spider-Man, it's Spider-Man Noir. So I love how you have all these vastly different spider people that even have different vision that have different animation styles. I mean, you have Spider Ham, who's much more cartoonish, and then Penny Parker's much more akin to anime. But what really propels this film up to number one for me is how it handles Miles as well as Peter B. Parker. Both these characters are very well done. And in particular, I think that the journey Peter B. Parker goes on in this film is incredibly powerful. So when we meet this other version of Peter Parker, that's not the Peter we see right at the beginning of this film, we see that unlike the Peter we saw right at the beginning, this is a older Peter who's more jaded, cynical, is at this point burnt out of being Spider-Man because he's been Spider-Man for longer and he suffered loss. We learn that his version of Aunt May has died and MJ left him because she wanted to take the next step. He was not ready for that. Therefore, he started overeating, staying in his suit all the time in order to deal with the fact that he was depressed. These are all classic signs of depression, that from him overeating to him staying in his suit a lot to him crying all the time. Clearly, he is feeling extremely sad. But then when he's pulled into a different dimension, meets Miles as well as the other spider people, he regains purpose in his life again as he becomes a mentor to Miles. And he also gets to meet a different version of Aunt May, who's the mother of Peter A. Parker, who died. And he also meets Gwen Stacy, who clearly reminds him of MJ. And he even meets an alternate version of MJ. What's so powerful to me about Peter B. Parker's journey is that he starts off so so flawed, but then he becomes better by the end of the film. There's a scene after after Miles's uncle uncle what's his name? The guy's the Prowler. Uncle Miles. Yeah, that's right. After Uncle Miles is killed by Kingpin, Miles is obviously devastated. All the other spider people come in to comfort him, but then they leave him behind. Peter B. Parker said, in response to Miles saying, "How will I know when I'm ready?" He says, "You don't. It's an act of faith." And then the third act pays this off so well because right before Peter B. Parker goes back to his own dimension, he's clearly scared. He tells Peter, "How will I know when I'm ready?" And then Miles says to him, "You don't. It's a leap of faith." And so when Peter B. Parker is falling toward the portal that will take him back to his own dimension, you see that he's actually smiling because his life has purpose and meaning again. He's starting to overcome his depression, and therefore after he goes back to his own dimension, we see that he actually goes back to his version of MJ with flowers. Clearly he's there to apologize for what happened between them. It's incredibly powerful. But that right there wraps up my ranking of the 9 Spider-Man films. And so I will be posting more rankings after this. Goodbye.